Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to deconstruct a really powerful analysis of the hunger crisis in Pakistan. Now, the data is shocking, and the suffering is absolutely undeniable. But the real story here, the one we're digging into, isn't just about what's happening. It's about who is telling the story, and maybe more importantly, what they're leaving out.
So, the analysis we're examining kicks off with a brutal, really clear-eyed diagnosis. It lays bare this national crisis where people are spending more money on food than ever before, but, and this is the crazy part, they're actually consuming fewer calories. It's a paradox that just screams deep systemic failure.
And if you want to put a number on it, well, the data is stark. Food insecurity across the country just skyrocketed. It jumped from affecting nearly 16% of households to over 24%. That's an increase of more than 50%. We're talking about millions of families facing what can only be described as slow-motion malnutrition.
So here's the central puzzle, right? The facts are solid, the statistics are robust, the human cost is tragically clear. So why would our source describe this powerful piece of analysis as being politically evasive? Why call it an escape hatch? Well, that's exactly what we're here to explain.
Let's get into the first critical piece of context because this reframes the entire discussion, the identity of the people who actually wrote this original analysis.
Yeah, this is the crucial question. It's not just what is being said, but who is saying it. Was this some bombshell report from outside watchdogs, investigative journalists, maybe independent academics? The answer, well, it changes everything.
The authors are Zafar Mirza and Miftah Ismail. And as you can see, these are not outsiders, not at all. One of them managed public health at the highest level. The other managed the nation's entire macroeconomy from the very center of power, even serving as finance minister. They were inside the system as these devastating trends were taking hold.
And this quote just brilliantly illustrates the source's core argument. This isn't some fresh discovery from the outside looking in. According to our source, it's a post-facto confession, just framed as neutral analysis. It's the perspective of those who are holding the levers of power, looking back on the results of their time in charge. All right, now let's see how our source actually dissects the arguments themselves. It shows how the original analysis can tell the truth, but, cleverly avoid telling the whole truth.
So the original article, it correctly points to some positive trends. Literacy is up, internet access has expanded. But our source argues this is a classic trap. Governments love to highlight these safe or cosmetic indicators because they signal progress without threatening the status quo. Connectivity is easy to talk about. But calories, that's a dangerous metric because it reveals who is truly paying the price.
This slide perfectly illustrates how the original article sets up and then dismantles a common illusion. It shows that nominal income, the number on your paycheck, it nearly doubled, which sounds great, right? But then it rightly adjusts for crushing inflation to reveal that real income, your actual purchasing power, has gone nowhere, or it's even declined. But this is where our source adds a crucial, almost ruthless layer to the analysis. It argues that this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a simple miscalculation. Allowing nominal incomes to rise while inflation just eats away at their value isn't incompetence. It's a deliberate policy choice, a form of deception that creates the illusion of progress while the population gets poorer. So the crucial thing here is to connect these abstract policy choices to their devastating real-world consequences. Who actually paid the price for these so-called macroeconomic repairs? A breathtaking 23%. That's the staggering loss of real income the data shows for the poorest urban households. The urban poor and the salaried middle class, the people who are easiest to tax and squeeze, they were hit the absolute hardest by these economic adjustments. Our source uses this incredibly powerful phrase to pull us out of the world of spreadsheets and percentages. A 23% loss of income for the poorest, that isn't just a data point. It's a family deciding which meal to skip. It is, in stark human terms, slow-motion malnutrition. And the damage is generational. One of the quietest but most catastrophic consequences was the collapse in education spending. As budgets tightened, families were forced to pull their children out of school, slashing what they spent on education. This locks in intergenerational damage for years and years to come. Now, this sacrifice from the poorest families didn't happen in a vacuum. Our source points out that while households were cutting education, other massive parts of the national budget were protected. Defense spending? Untouched. Subsidies for elite interests? Still intact. And the losses from state-owned enterprises? Tolerated. The priorities are right there, in plain sight. Our source frames these fiscal decisions with a really stark term, class war by budget line. This isn't about unfortunate necessities or complex trade-offs. It's about deliberate choices with clear winners and clear losers, fought not on a battlefield, but on the lines of a national budget. Okay, let's move on and see how our source critiques the conclusion of the original article. After laying out all this suffering, who or what is ultimately blamed? Here we see what our source calls the biggest dodge. The original analysis blames these vague, impersonal forces, an extractive economic system, governance issues. But it stops short of naming names. Who are the extractors? Which groups benefit from this system and actively block reform? See, blaming the system allows the architects of that system to avoid accountability. And the proposed solution to all this? Get ready for it. A national dialogue to build consensus. Our source is scathing here, calling this the classic, standard, elite escape hatch. The argument is that Pakistan doesn't lack dialogues or white papers, it lacks the political will to enforce reforms against the powerful people who would lose from them. A call for more talk is really just a call to postpone action. So, after this ruthless reading, what's the final verdict? Is this original article a brave diagnosis of a national tragedy? Or is it something else entirely? Our source actually coins a term for what it believes is happening here: fiscal absolution. It's a really powerful concept. The act of using the tools of objective analysis to describe a problem you had a hand in creating, thereby distancing yourself from the responsibility for it. Now, this slide highlights the nuance in the source's final verdict, which is really interesting. It isn't saying the original article is false. On the contrary, the data is excellent, the diagnosis of human suffering is accurate, but where it fails is in taking political ownership and showing the courage to call for reforms that would actually challenge the powerful. In other words, it's truthful, but it's just not brave enough. And this is the provocative thought to end on. It's a question that goes far beyond this specific article. At what point does a detailed, accurate explanation of a problem you helped create stop being analysis and start becoming a way of forgiving yourself for it? When does an indictment of the system become an apology for the self,